Former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Ivanovich, will be the next witness to testify before the House Intelligence Committee on Friday. She was abruptly pushed out of her post in May after Trump administration officials believed she was undermining the president. During their appearances on Capitol Hill Wednesday, George Kent and Bill Taylor praised their former colleague. Here's what they had to say about Ivanovich.
I would like to conclude my opening remarks with an observation about some of my fellow public servants who have come under personal attacks: Ambassador Ivanovich, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, and Dr. Hill. Masha, Alex, and Fiona were born abroad before their families or they themselves personally chose to immigrate to the United States. They all made the professional choice to serve the United States as public officials.
So when Secretary Pompeo asked me to go back to Kyiv, I wanted to say yes, but it was not an easy decision. The former ambassador, Masha Ivanovich, has been treated poorly, caught in a web of political machinations both in Kyiv and in Washington. I feared that those problems were still present.
A story published last weekend in the New York Times details the State Department's resistance to the Trump administration's relations with Ukraine, while career diplomats have expressed a sense of pride for defending American ideals. New York Times diplomatic correspondent Lara Jakes joins me now from Washington. Lara, thanks very much for being with us. How did State Department officials view Marie Ivanovich's firing earlier this year?
Well, Ms. Ivanovich is revered in the State Department. The breadth and depth of her experience as a career diplomat has gained her a lot of respect, especially among women in the State Department, many of whom have described her as a role model. It's important to remember that of the 13,000 Foreign Service officers in the United States Diplomatic Corps, they really see their job as larger than any one presidential administration. They see themselves as carrying out American ideals that span beyond any one administration and into the future. So much like the military and the CIA, they are looking more towards strategy as opposed to carrying out a single foreign policy, even as they try to answer the needs of a single administration.
And Lara, can you provide some perspective into the roles and responsibilities of both George Kent and Bill Taylor, and why Democrats consider their testimony so valuable?
Sure. Well, George Kent is what's called a DAS. He's the Deputy Foreign Secretary of State for the European Bureau at the State Department, which means that he oversees the desk officers at the State Department who are actually trying to formulate, shape, and carry out Ukraine policy. Bill Taylor was a former diplomat, a former ambassador to Ukraine during the Bush administration. He retired in 2015, went to the United States Institute of Peace, but again, his credentials were so respected that he was asked by Secretary Pompeo to return after Ms. Ivanovich was ordered back from Kiev to the United States as part of this shadow foreign policy campaign that was run by Rudy Giuliani, Mr. Trump's personal lawyer. So the two of them have been star witnesses in the Democrats' inquiry against Mr. Trump and against this shadow foreign policy. They have provided some of the most damning testimony, and they have made clear, according to them, that they believe that there was a pressure campaign by the Trump administration that tied up American aid to Ukraine in order to achieve some political dirt on Mr. Trump's political opponents.
Well, you wrote in your story that it is rare for members of the State Department to contribute to a movement against a president and his appointees. What makes the current circumstances so unusual?
Well, again, these people see their jobs, much like the military and the CIA, is going beyond any one presidential administration. Some people described to me it was like the stages of grief. First, they were shocked that to hear of this shadow campaign, to hear that Ms. Ivanovich had been recalled from Washington, and then they were disappointed. Then they felt grief and sadness, and then they came to feel a great amount of pride that for the most part, with the exception of the Army Lieutenant Colonel and the career Russia foreign policy expert who had come from a think tank and who was then in the White House National Security Council, most of the people who have testified in this and who have brought the president's foreign policy campaign to light have been career diplomats, and they feel a great sense of pride in that.
Well, Ambassador Taylor had an exchange with GOP counsel Stephen Castor about an irregular channel between the U.S. and Ukraine. That channel included Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland. I want to play some of that.
And the second member of the irregular channel is Ambassador Sondland, who is Senate confirmed, ambassador to the EU. So his involvement here, while not necessarily part of his official duties as the ambassador to the EU, certainly is not outlandish for him to be interested and engaged pursuant to the President or Secretary Pompeo's direction. Correct?
It's a little unusual for the U.S. ambassador to the EU to play a role in Ukraine policy.
Okay. And, it might be irregular, but it's certainly not outlandish.
The pauses were quite telling, Lara. What are Gordon Sondland's responsibilities as ambassador to the EU? And do you agree with Ambassador Taylor's characterization of his role in Ukraine?
Well, it's not up for me to say whether I agree or disagree, but what's certainly true is that Ukraine is not a member of the European Union. And so for the EU ambassador to be playing a part in Ukrainian policy certainly would be unusual.
All right, Lara Jakes in Washington. Lara, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.